Her own son leaned in and whispered, "She'll be dead soon anyway." He didn't know Eleanor, his mother, had been secretly lip-reading for months. By the time he tried to steal her house, her will had already erased him. The eviction notice wasn't signed by her, it was signed by the girl she once mentored. And the world? It was about to learn exactly what a silenced mother sounds like when she strikes back. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The applause was thunderous, or so Eleanor assumed. She smiled graciously, nodding at the faces that blurred into a sea of movement under the string lights draped across the retirement hall. The soft clink of wine glasses, the blur of toasts raised, the pull of confetti streamers curling mid-air. She registered them all without hearing a single sound. Only the visual tempo of celebration reached her. It had been 6 months since her hearing collapsed like a bridge eaten from beneath. Sudden, permanent, no miraculous fix. No hearing aids could mend the kind of silence that had taken hold. The doctors had called it idiopathic. Eleanor called it fate's punctuation. Now, the night of her retirement, 41 years as a public librarian, archivist, and mentor, she sat in the center of a banquet arranged in her honor, her name piped onto a marble cake in lilac frosting. Ryan, her only son, took the stage. He held the microphone loosely, his grin wide and easy, the kind of smile people practiced in car mirrors. Alyssa stood nearby, arms crossed delicately, her smile thinner. Eleanor straightened her spine. Ryan tapped the mic, checking if it worked, and began. She couldn't hear the words, but she watched his lips. She'd been practicing secretly, night after night, using YouTube tutorials and mirror drills to reclaim what the world thought she'd lost. She'd told no one, not even her doctor. Ryan spoke with animated hands. She raised me on overdue fines and late-night stories. The room laughed. She taught me to alphabetize before I could ride a bike. She made sure I had more library cards than birthday candles. A round of cheers. He waited for them to settle. Then he leaned just slightly away from the mic, just enough to believe only Alyssa could hear. "She's useless now. Just don't say it into a mic." The words carved themselves into Eleanor's mind like they'd been etched in glass. His lips had formed them cleanly, deliberately. She saw every consonant, every vowel, useless. He turned back to the crowd with a fresh wave of charisma, raising his glass. "To my mother, who gave everything." The audience roared, toasts lifted, glasses clinked. Eleanor didn't move. She kept smiling, a queen in exile, nodding with grace she no longer owed him. But inside her chest, something dark and cold unfolded, a frost that reached the pit of her stomach. He thought she hadn't heard, because to him silence meant absence, emptiness, irrelevance. He didn't know that silence could sharpen a person, could peel back sound to show the bones of things, who someone really was when they believed they were alone with their words. She kept clapping as he stepped off the stage, hugging guests on the way down, his eyes not meeting hers. Alyssa gave her a thin-lipped smile. Empty and ornamental. Eleanor held that smile. Let it become a mask. Behind it, a vow began to take shape, quiet, unfinished, and written not in rage but in resolve. The party faded. A cake was cut. Guests spilled into the parking lot like confetti drifting away on the wind. Her co-workers kissed her cheek. Her supervisor gave her a book signed by everyone in the branch, The Art of Letting Go. How fitting. Alone in the empty hall, Eleanor removed her corsage and stared at the mess left behind. Half-filled cups, a napkin with her name spelled wrong, a stray baby sock somehow beneath the table. She sat again in the chair where she'd heard her son erase her. Her fingers trembled. She pressed them to her lips, then her temples. She remembered another night, decades ago, when Ryan was still small, 6 maybe, crying after a thunderstorm while she read to him by flashlight in a blanket fort. "You're safe," she had told him. "You'll always be safe with me." She had meant it. But somewhere between that night and this one, the promise had reversed. Now it was she who needed protection. And it would come. Not from kindness, but from clarity. She stood, picked up the discarded program, and folded it sharply down the middle. The smile returned, smaller now, but steel beneath it. They thought the silence made her weak. They would learn what silence could carry, and what it could destroy. The silence hadn't come overnight. It arrived slowly, like water rising around her ankles while she stood smiling at the shoreline. At first it was only birdsong that faded, then the kettle's whistle, muted like someone turning down the world's volume. She pretended not to notice, turned up the television, blamed the batteries in the remote. But deep down, Eleanor knew. The day she missed the smoke alarm altogether, she stopped pretending. The doctors confirmed it with a soft click of a door behind them and clinical sympathy that didn't quite reach their eyes. Age-related, likely permanent. They offered brochures, devices, seminars on coping, but none of them warned her how fast people stopped looking you in the eye once they believed you couldn't hear. Ryan had nodded at the appointment with forced concern, already glancing at his phone while Alyssa sighed, her nails drumming on her leather tote. "Well," she said flatly, "it'll mean we'll need to adjust some things." Eleanor had smiled then. She'd been doing that a lot lately. At home, they spoke around her instead of to her. Ryan's voice took on a strange tone, louder, slower, as though speaking to a child in trouble. Alyssa offered passive-aggressive suggestions. Maybe it was time for somewhere simpler, with a nurse on call. She began logging their words, not for protection at first, but for proof. A small navy notebook, no title. She kept it by the tea canisters in the cabinet. Every night she wrote down what she saw and read on their lips. Not all of it was cruel, but none of it was kind. She leaves the stove on. She's getting weird, like paranoid weird. She won't even notice if we just start moving things. They had no idea how sharp the silence had made her. She practiced lip reading in secret. An hour each evening in the guest room mirror. At first it was awkward, like learning a second language after the age of 70. But repetition carved understanding. The F shape, the soft doubled pull of 'em. She joined an online forum, Quiet Courage, and posted under the name Echogram. Somewhere between phoneme drills and journal entries, she started to listen differently. It wasn't just what they said. It was how Ryan didn't touch her shoulder anymore when he passed by. How Alyssa placed the salt closer to Ryan's plate, as if Eleanor's hands were suddenly unreliable. She began to feel herself becoming a ghost in her own home. And then the mirror started to reflect something she hadn't seen in years. Not frailty, but focus. One night, Alyssa poured herself a glass of wine and said, too brightly, "You know, Eleanor, Golden Pines is a wonderful place. They do crafts. And bingo, you'd have your own room." Eleanor didn't flinch. She only nodded as if considering it. Then, once they'd gone upstairs, she jotted it down in her navy notebook and underlined it twice. Golden Pines, as if she were some unwatered plant to be relocated. But what Alyssa didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that Eleanor had already started protecting herself. She'd gone back to her old safe deposit box 2 weeks earlier. The original deed to the house was still there. So was the trust from Harold, still unsigned but legally viable. She ran her fingers along its edge like it might still hold heat. At midnight, unable to sleep, Eleanor sat in her chair beside the fireplace, the glow of the screen from her tablet soft on her face. She clicked into a thread titled, "When They Treat You Like You're Already Gone." The first line on the page read, "Record everything. If they think you're silent, you're their mirror." She didn't cry. Instead, she turned off the tablet, picked up the navy notebook, and added a new entry. Not something they had said, but something she now believed. They only talk when they think you're not listening, so I'll become what they fear most, proof that I heard every word. And beneath that, she drew a simple, steady line, a divider. Because from this moment forward, things would not go unnoticed, they would be recorded, and eventually, they would be answered. The office smelled faintly of stale coffee and laminate wood polish. On the desk between them sat a single manila folder, thick, worn, handled too many times. Eleanor sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, a patterned scarf covering her hearing aids, though she no longer needed the disguise. She'd worn it anyway. Let them keep underestimating her. Across the desk, Craig Hensley adjusted his glasses and smiled in that oily way attorneys do when they assume you won't catch the clause that guts your future. "Well, it's all been handled already, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, tapping the folder. "Power of attorney, deed updates. Your son and daughter-in-law have been very proactive, and you did sign off." Eleanor tilted her head, brow furrowed. "I signed?" she asked, slow and uncertain. "I don't remember?" Hensley gave a sympathetic chuckle. "It's not unusual to forget a few formalities. We had you here last August. See?" He spun the folder toward her, pointing to a single page marked in blue ink. Her signature, or what looked like it. Eleanor leaned closer, her finger hovering just above the line. Her expression remained soft, confused, but behind her gaze, gears turned with the precision of a watchmaker. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and tilted it ever so slightly against her wallet, camera facing out. Recording. "I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood," she said, her voice mild. "Can you walk me through exactly what I signed that day?" Hensley obliged. He explained the deed transfer, the healthcare proxy, the clause that gave Ryan co-management of her assets in the event of progressive cognitive decline. "But I passed my competency exam last May," Eleanor said, frowning. Hensley paused, blinked. "I believe your son said there had been a change in your condition. He brought a note." He rifled through the folder. "Yes, a letter from your primary physician. It's somewhere here." Eleanor's voice cut in, crisp this time. "My doctor moved to Oregon last March. I haven't had a primary since." Silence, the kind that sucked the air out of a room. Hensley froze with the folder still open, suddenly very aware of the phone on the table, half tucked under the wallet. Eleanor let the pause breathe. Then she offered a small smile, softer than a threat, sharper than a warning. "Thank you, Craig," she said, collecting her things. "You've helped more than you know." He stammered something about reevaluations and clerical errors, but Eleanor was already walking out, scarf floating behind her like a banner. She drove straight to the post office, uploaded the recording to a cloud drive, and made 2 encrypted copies, one for her lawyer, the other for Melinda. Melinda Baird had been her neighbor once, 30 years ago, and was now a certified notary with a nose for fraud and a fierce love of crossword puzzles. She met Eleanor at the bakery on 4th, where the coffee was bitter and the cinnamon rolls unreasonably good. "You knew the signature was fake?" Melinda asked after Eleanor handed her a printed scan. "I've signed my name the same way for 50 years, Eleanor said. "That one curved like it came from someone guessing." Melinda squinted, then smirked. "That's not even your E. That's a damn cursive 3. They both laughed, but the humor cracked quickly. "You know what this means, Elle," Melinda added, serious now. "They've laid the groundwork to move you out legally. If you hadn't caught this—" "I did catch it. And now what?" Eleanor reached into her tote and pulled out an older folder. Faded blue. The clasp still worked. Inside was a living trust Harold had drafted but never filed, his handwriting, full of crossouts and margin notes. One section underlined twice, "Transfer rights retainable by Eleanor Whitmore, regardless of next of kin." "I want to reactivate this," Eleanor said. "Retroactively, if we can. The bank never closed the file, just froze it." Melinda exhaled. "It's old, but viable. If we notarize the reactivation and establish a new baseline of intent, yes, you can pull everything from the fake deed, including the house." Eleanor nodded. She didn't cry, didn't shake, just quietly whispered, "Harold told me once, never put your name on something you aren't willing to lose." I think he knew this was coming. Melinda reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "When do we start?" Eleanor looked out the window. The sky had turned the color of old pewter. "We already did." It started with the photo of Harold fishing at Lake Winfield. The frame had always sat on the hallway console beneath the sconce Eleanor kept polished, its edge worn from the sweep of her thumb each morning. One Thursday, it was simply gone. "Maybe you moved it?" Ryan said, not looking up from his phone. Eleanor searched the linen closet, the upstairs bookshelf, the garage. Nothing. The next day, the antique brooch she wore every year on Harold's birthday was missing from her jewelry tray. Then the quilt her mother had sewn before the war disappeared from the cedar chest. Each time, Ryan's voice carried the same rehearsed tone. "You're under a lot of stress. Maybe your memory's just slipping a little." Alyssa added, "It happens. Don't be embarrassed." Eleanor didn't reply. She didn't argue. But the look she gave them each time lasted just a beat too long. By the third disappearance, her wedding band from Harold's military shadow box, she knew it wasn't forgetfulness. It was a setup. The first thing she did was stop sleeping upstairs. Instead, she moved to the downstairs guest room where she could control one entry point and keep the door locked. She logged each missing item by date and time in the back of her Navy notebook, next to her transcribed whispers and misdirected medical bills. Then, quietly, she ordered a new kind of protection. The technician from Parallax Security Systems installed the cameras under the guise of fall detection sensors, one above the stairwell, one in the hallway mirror frame, one angled toward her safe in the upstairs office. All camera-enabled, all accessible from an encrypted tablet that she kept tucked between her scarves. She spent the next week pretending to be more confused than ever. "Muffin trays in the laundry again," Alyssa said too loudly one evening, shaking her head with faux concern. Ryan chimed in, "She keeps signing the wrong date on checks." Eleanor heard them all, not with ears, but with a clarity sharper than noise. That Sunday, while Ryan and Alyssa were out at brunch, Eleanor sat with Melinda at the kitchen island, the cameras rolling overhead. "Do you know a forensic handwriting analyst?" Eleanor asked, flipping open the folder of documents Craig Hensley had shown her. Melinda raised a brow. "I know 3. One who worked the Millerson embezzlement case. You want the best?" Eleanor nodded. She removed one final document, her genuine signature from an old tax return. "Let's have them compare this to what Ryan filed." Melinda glanced around the house. "You sure you want to do this while they're still living here?" "I want them to see me watch," Eleanor said. "Let them start wondering what I know. That's where the fear begins." She paused, eyes drifting to the closed office door upstairs. "They moved my things," she whispered. "Not just the little ones. Books, files. My Social Security paperwork was missing last week. I found it scanned on Ryan's tablet." Melinda stiffened. "They're building a file on me," Eleanor added, "to prove I'm incompetent, to lock me out of my own life before I can fight back. You're not imagining this, Elle. And you're not alone." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I'm deaf, not blind." That night, she logged into the secure banking portal she'd quietly reopened under her maiden name. It still had the account Harold set up for her decades ago, back when they were just married and couldn't afford much more than rice and canned beans. She began moving assets, slowly, discreetly. Retirement savings, bonds, even the small joint fund she'd kept for family emergencies. She labeled the new account, Second Wind Fund. At 2:17 a.m., her hallway camera captured Ryan creeping into the office, rummaging through the drawer where she once kept the deed folder. The next morning, she laid a single post-it note atop the empty drawer. "Looking for something? E." No one said a word at breakfast, but Alyssa didn't meet her eyes, and Ryan buttered his toast like it required surgical precision. Upstairs, the hallway light flickered once, then glowed steady again. The house wasn't haunted, but it had started listening, and Eleanor had begun turning silence into ammunition. Eleanor sat on the exam table, hands folded in her lap as the audiologist adjusted the dim lighting in the room. The walls were painted a soft green. Calming, they called it. She listened, or rather, watched, the way he spoke. His hands moved like they'd practiced this consultation 100 times. "With your profile," he said gently, "a cochlear implant could restore a portion of your hearing. Not perfect, but better than silence." She nodded slowly. "And if I don't?" He hesitated. "Then it stays as it is." She smiled, small and deliberate. "Then I think I'll leave it as it is." The man blinked. "Are you sure?" "More than I've ever been about anything." She left the office with the implant pamphlet still folded in her purse. Untouched. Because Eleanor wasn't deaf. Not entirely. Her right ear had recovered partial hearing 6 weeks after the initial collapse, but she hadn't told Ryan, or Alyssa, or even Melinda. She'd let them speak freely, let them assume she lived in a world without sound, let them reveal exactly who they were when they thought she couldn't hear them. And now, they were cornering her. The note arrived on a Thursday, left on her nightstand like an invitation or a threat. "Let's talk, together. You need support. This is getting out of hand. Sunday at 4, living room. Ryan and Alyssa." The handwriting was Alyssa's, but the intent stank of Ryan. He wanted control. He wanted her compliance. What he'd get was neither. She spent the morning ironing her clothes. Gray slacks, a collared cream blouse, no jewelry, just composure. At 3:55 p.m., Eleanor placed a discreet recorder in her pocket. By 3:58, she was seated, back straight, on the edge of the armchair Ryan used to fall asleep in as a child. The scene had been arranged like a deposition. Alyssa clutched a folder. Ryan wore a look of forced empathy. There was herbal tea no one had poured. "Mom," Ryan began, "we're worried about you. We think it's time to talk about some next steps." Eleanor tilted her head. "Such as?" Alyssa leaned forward. "You've seemed confused, forgetting names, misplacing things, talking to yourself." "I talk to myself because no one talks to me," Eleanor said evenly. Ryan sighed. "This isn't an attack. We just think it's time to consider assisted living, somewhere safe." "I see." She nodded once, then reached into her tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She passed it to Ryan. He opened it with suspicion, his fingers tightening as he read. "What is this?" "A signed, sealed psychological assessment from Dr. Carlton, cognitive testing, full marks, no signs of dementia, decline, or delusion." Alyssa froze. You scheduled that?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "I may be slow, but I'm not lost." Ryan set the envelope down carefully. "This doesn't change that you're acting irrationally. You're paranoid. You think we're stealing from you." She said nothing, just reached into her pocket and tapped the recorder, letting the red light blink slowly in plain sight. Alyssa paled. Ryan's voice sharpened. "What is this?" "Insurance," Eleanor said. His voice cracked for the first time. "You're not well." Eleanor leaned forward. "I am better than I've ever been. And I've heard everything, Ryan." Every word he blanched. Then, not knowing he was still being recorded, Ryan snapped. "You'll be dead soon anyway. What's the point of fighting?" The silence after the sentence was louder than any scream. Eleanor stood. "This isn't a family meeting," she said. "It's a farewell." She turned to go, and just before exiting added, "Also, this house? It's being appraised tomorrow. I'm meeting with a realtor. You'll want to start packing." Ryan surged to his feet. "You can't do that." She looked over her shoulder. "Oh, but I can." That night, Melinda helped her upload the recording to her secure drive, labeled whispergamefamilyintervention.wave. The next morning, Eleanor walked the property line with the realtor, Savannah Baird, Melinda's niece who had worked in ethics enforcement before switching to real estate. Smart, steady, discreet. "This place will move fast," Savannah said, studying the wraparound porch. "You looking for a clean exit?" "No," Eleanor said, watching the wind lift the edge of a wind chime. "I'm looking for a clean start." She didn't need ears to hear the shift coming. It was already echoing around the walls they thought they'd inherited, and this time she was the one writing the story. The pills were pale lavender, chalky against Eleanor's tongue. Every morning, Alyssa placed them in a small plastic cup beside her tea, 2 before breakfast, 2 after, supposedly for blood pressure, maybe anxiety. Eleanor had stopped asking weeks ago. Instead, she stopped swallowing them. She waited until Alyssa left the room, then quietly spit them into a napkin, slipped them into the lining of her purse. Sometimes she'd tuck them behind books in the library room until she could gather enough to make it worth the trip. 3 weeks' worth sat in a small glass vial now, labeled and packed carefully in bubble wrap. Melinda had driven her to a private toxicology lab outside city limits, the kind that didn't ask too many questions when paid in cash. The results came back on a Tuesday. Sedatives. specifically a low-dose benzodiazepine, enough to cause fog, disorientation, imbalance over time. Not prescribed, not legal. Eleanor read the lab printout 3 times, then placed it in the fireproof box beneath her bed. The one where she kept Harold's war medals, her original deed, and the notarized reinstatement of her trust. When Alyssa came by that afternoon with her usual bright lipsticked grin, Eleanor smiled wider than usual. "Did you take your morning meds, Elle?" she asked, using that syrupy tone she always reserved for the dog or the pharmacist. Eleanor blinked slowly. "I think so. Or was that yesterday?" Alyssa's eyes narrowed. "You've really got to be more careful. Missing doses isn't good for your clarity." "I've been very clear lately," Eleanor murmured. "What was that?" "I said I'm sure you're right," she replied, soft and obedient. Later that evening, Eleanor watched from the hallway camera as Alyssa opened her bedroom drawer, watched her slip another unlabeled vial into the daily pill organizer. The next morning, Eleanor didn't touch her tea. She stirred it slowly, eyes never leaving Alyssa's face. "You know," Alyssa said casually, "Ryan and I have been talking again. About Golden Pines. It's really lovely. Private chef, beautiful grounds, lots of supervision." Eleanor reached for her tea with a tremor she exaggerated just slightly. "Do they have bingo?" Alyssa looked startled. "Of course." "Then maybe I'll go," Eleanor said. "If I forget who I am before you do." Alyssa stood. Her smile was gone. Eleanor logged the moment in her notebook. Wednesday, 9:17 a.m. Baited Alyssa into timeline. She took it. That afternoon, she scanned the lab results into a locked drive and emailed copies to her lawyer, Melinda, and her silent insurance folder, RX proof_6B_sedation. She also included a time-stamped clip of Alyssa placing the unlabeled vial into the organizer. That night, Eleanor sat by the fire in the den, legs tucked beneath her, a notebook resting on her lap and the firelight flickering over her glasses. It was no longer enough to defend herself. They'd tried to erase her, and now she wanted more than safety. She wanted clarity, legacy. And for the first time since Harold's passing, something close to vengeance flickered in her bloodstream, not as rage, but as structure. She began sketching out her case like a story outline, characters, motive, timeline, evidence. She'd been a librarian her whole life. She knew how to sort facts from fiction. And she'd read enough mystery novels to know motive is always the seed, but it's pattern that proves it. This wouldn't be just a lawsuit, it would be a reveal. The phone buzzed beside her. A message from Melinda. "I've got the paperwork ready. Next step is deposition prep." Eleanor texted back, "Schedule it." The front door opened downstairs, Ryan returning late. His voice floated up the stairwell. Something about traffic, something about bourbon. She didn't need to hear every word to feel the pressure rising. She closed the notebook. Tomorrow she would schedule a medical review for the sedative trace and request a third-party psychologist to reconfirm her mental state. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted to leave no corner untouched. Let them come. She wasn't building a defense. She was setting a trap. And one day very soon, they would step into it without even seeing the snap coming. Eleanor stared at the checkbook like it might confess. The numbers didn't match. The withdrawal dates were wrong. Slightly, subtly, but unmistakably wrong. A $10,000 cashier's check issued on a day she'd spent the morning at physical therapy and the afternoon at her book club. A wire transfer to an unknown brokerage firm. A roofing upgrade invoice for a house that had no scaffolding, no dust, not even a nail out of place. And the signature at the bottom? It curved the same way the forged deed had. She opened her Navy notebook and logged it all. Page number, bank, transaction ID, each line a brick in the fortress she was building. She made a fresh pot of coffee, black and scalding, and pulled the fireproof box out from under her bed again. This time, she didn't reach for Harold's medals. She pulled the flash drive labeled simply, Mirror Fund. Melinda arrived an hour later, armed with a binder clip and a face like someone ready to audit the devil himself. "I found more," Eleanor said without greeting. "He used my social, a home equity loan. 30,000. Melinda let out a breath that ended in a curse. "Did he forge anything else?" A co-signer form. It's in the online portal under miscellaneous uploads. I printed it. She handed it over. My maiden name's misspelled. I haven't used that name in 40 years. Melinda pulled out her phone. We need a forensic accountant. I've got a guy, used to work fraud cases in D.C. Is he quiet? Discreet as a locked vault. His name's Duncan Reese. Eleanor nodded. Bring him. That evening, she sat down with 3 decades of tax returns, old pay stubs from the library, and all her retirement account statements. She highlighted, cross-referenced, and categorized. By midnight, she had 2 piles, hers and his. She looked down at the second one. It was thicker. She felt a burn in her throat, not from grief, but shame. The kind you only feel when the betrayal is so personal it makes you question your own judgment. The next day, Duncan arrived in a brown windbreaker and carried a briefcase lined with soft leather. He didn't ask why Eleanor had called, just listened, eyes scanning every receipt and document like they were suspects in a lineup. This is systemic, he finally said. Your son's been siphoning from you for years, small amounts, then bigger. Death by 1,000 cuts. Can we reverse any of it? Some, but it's better if we trap him in real time. Eleanor nodded, then bait him. That afternoon she logged into the old life insurance portal Harold had set up in '96. She adjusted the beneficiary, updated the password, and then she pulled out the envelope marked posthumous, her open letter. It wasn't angry. It was documentary. She wrote plainly, she listed facts, she named names, she quoted dates, and most of all, she told the story, not of abuse, but of slow, cruel neglect, of becoming invisible in her own home. She ended it with one line. They didn't take everything. They only taught me what I never want back. The letter was uploaded to a drive scheduled to release it to 6 newspapers and 1 podcast the moment her death certificate was filed. Not because she was planning anything dramatic, because she was planning everything quietly. That evening, Melinda returned with the updated version of Eleanor's will. This locks everything, she said. They get nothing without your handwritten codicil, not even the couch cushions. Eleanor signed in black ink, no hesitation. Outside, the wind picked up, sharp and restless against the window panes. She looked up from the paper and whispered, not to anyone, but as a kind of benediction. They built a case against my silence. She folded the will and slid it into the box. Now I'll show them what it means to speak without raising my voice. Eleanor had stopped, listening for words. Now she watched for silences, the kind that lingered between glances, at the ends of sentences never fully spoken. Her family had become a study in unsaid things, and she took to observing them like a scholar reviewing a case study she already knew the ending to. Ryan had a new tic, rubbing the bridge of his nose when money came up. Alyssa lingered too long near Eleanor's desk drawers. They no longer hid their motives. They wrapped them in soft tones and practiced smiles. Just sign these, Alyssa had said, sliding over another medical directive with faux cheer. It's just a formality, really. Eleanor signed nothing, but she smiled. Always smiled. Instead, she created noise where they expected silence. On Monday, she created a fake folder titled Backup Accounts. She left it unlocked on her desktop, filled with a handful of doctored PDFs, mock bank balances, trust summaries, even a false inheritance breakdown, all referencing a fictional offshore annuity. By Wednesday, Ryan had opened the folder 3 times. She watched it all through her activity tracker. "Where's the Vanguard paperwork?" he asked Alyssa later that night, pacing the den. "What Vanguard paperwork?" Eleanor, in the hallway beyond the door, simply sipped her tea and noted the timestamp. Melinda called from the notary office 2 days later. "The stock's cleared." "You're liquid." Eleanor didn't flinch. Harold's portfolio, mutual funds he'd once called quiet horses, was gone. Transferred into a freshly minted account under the trust. A ghost account, hidden under a name from her mother's side of the family. One Alyssa wouldn't recognize even if she found it. By Thursday, the fighting started. "You told me she'd be compliant by now," Alyssa snapped in the kitchen. "I can't force her to sign," Ryan hissed back. "She still has capacity on file." "She's stalling." What if she's talking to a lawyer? I am her power of attorney. Not until she signs this new version. Their words dissolved into walls. Eleanor sat outside beneath the maple tree Harold had planted the year Ryan was born. She folded her hands in her lap and exhaled into the wind. Every part of her plan was designed to slow them down, exhaust them, make them scramble until they tore into each other. And it was working. That evening, a soft knock came at her bedroom door. Ryan's son, Jack, 16 and mostly quiet, held out a folded piece of notebook paper. His face was pale, his shoulders square. "I know you're not deaf," he said. "I figured it out months ago." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. "I'm sorry for how they treat you," he added, his voice low. "You don't deserve it." He left before she could reply. The note remained in her hand. Inside, written in awkward teen script, "They talk like you're not real. I don't. I miss the you from before, but you're still here. I see you." She didn't cry, but she folded the paper gently and placed it in the same fireproof box as Harold's medals. The next morning, she met Savannah, the realtor, on the front porch. "The comps came in higher than we expected," Savannah said. "If we list in 2 weeks, you'll spark a bidding war." "I want it gone in 1, Eleanor replied. Savannah arched a brow. "Everything okay?" Eleanor's gaze lingered on the horizon. "They're playing chess. I'm pulling the board." Savannah nodded, understanding more than she let on. "Then let's move." As they walked the perimeter, Eleanor reached down to brush a loose rock from the path and saw something glinting between the cracks in the step. She picked it up. Her antique brooch, the one that had disappeared weeks ago, planted again. She stared at it a long moment before slipping it into her pocket, the smile fading from her face like a curtain drawn. They weren't just watching her now, they were trying to rewrite the scene, and they didn't know the cameras were still rolling. The house was silent, but it wasn't still. Boxes lined the hallway, marked only with color-coded dots, green for keep, blue for donate, red for do not touch. Eleanor moved slowly, deliberately, wrapping each photo frame in old Sunday editions of the Times. Her hands didn't shake. She came to the last frame on the mantel, Ryan's high school graduation. He was beaming in the picture, cap askew, Eleanor beside him in a floral dress, arms slung around his shoulder. She pried open the backing, slid the photo out, and peeled away the caption glued beneath the glass. "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it." The paper tore cleanly. She folded it into a neat square and fed it into the fireplace without ceremony. By the time Savannah returned with the final contract, the rooms had begun to echo. "Buyer signed," Savannah said, holding out the clipboard. "Transfer clears Monday. Funds are already in escrow." Eleanor adjusted her scarf and took the pen. "She's sure?" Savannah smiled. "She's thrilled. Says it feels full circle." The buyer's name printed neatly on the final line. June Adler. June Adler. Once a bright, stubborn teenager who came to Eleanor's library 3 times a week asking for biographies and philosophy books. Deaf since birth. Now a professor of linguistics and recipient of the Eleanor Whitmore Literacy Award from a fund Eleanor had quietly established years ago. "This house will become a center," Savannah said. "Her nonprofits already approved the zoning, language, advocacy, tech training, a home that listens." Eleanor nodded once. "Then it's going to the right ears." At sunrise on Monday, Eleanor stood in the driveway, suitcase at her side, coat zipped, waiting. A yellow cab pulled up precisely on time. Ryan opened the front door, rubbing sleep from his face, still barefoot. "Where are you going?" he asked groggily, scanning the empty space behind her. "Home," Eleanor said. "This is your home." She smiled. "Not anymore." He looked past her, spotting Savannah stepping from her car, clipboard in hand. "Wait, what is this?" Savannah handed him an envelope. The paper was thick, legal weight. "Eviction notice," she said plainly, "from the current owner." Ryan froze. "I am the power of attorney." "No," Savannah corrected. "You were. But this transfer didn't go through you." Behind her, June exited the passenger side of Savannah's car. Her cane tapped lightly against the driveway as she approached. She offered Ryan a kind, measured nod. He didn't return it. Eleanor watched the exchange like someone observing the final scene of a play she'd memorized line for line. Then she turned and stepped into the cab. She didn't look back. The assisted living complex was nothing like Golden Pines. It wasn't sterile. There were no manufactured smiles or fake wood paneling. Her apartment faced a garden, the front door locked from the inside, and no one came in without buzzing first. She set up the tablet in her kitchen. One folder, one file, the letter. It was time. She logged into her secure drive and clicked Publish Now. Then she walked to the window and made a cup of tea. By evening, the letter had gone viral. It was reposted on 3 elder advocacy forums, then picked up by the Washington Ledger, and finally read aloud on a podcast called Inheritance Interrupted. The title of the post, I Heard Everything, a letter from the woman you thought had no ears left. She didn't name Ryan or Alyssa directly, but she didn't need to. She described the slow bleed of autonomy, the whispered plans, the weaponized concern. She described the silence not as loss, but as clarity. The letter ended with one line. They tried to manage my decline. I chose to choreograph my exit. Messages began pouring in. Emails from strangers, postcards, flowers delivered anonymously. One note read, "Thank you for showing us silence isn't surrender." Eleanor placed the card in her drawer beside Jack's apology letter. At twilight, she pulled back the curtain. Across the courtyard, lights were flicking on in other windows. She couldn't hear the voices, but she knew some of them were now speaking her name, with reverence, not regret. And somewhere in the house she'd left behind, Ryan was staring at empty frames, wondering when the story had stopped being his. He wouldn't find the answer in the walls, because the house no longer belonged to someone who had been silenced. It belonged to someone who had listened, and Eleanor had finally become the echo they never saw coming. The letter had done more than sting. It had detonated. 2 days after it went live, Ryan sent a certified request for mediation. A white envelope arrived at Eleanor's new residence, embossed with a firm's logo she recognized, one he couldn't afford on his own. Inside was a single sheet. We request an opportunity for confidential family-first resolution concerning recent property and asset decisions. Eleanor read it once, then placed it flat on the kitchen counter and poured tea directly over it. Melinda laughed when she saw the damp smear. "That'll be a no, I take it?" "I'm not discussing legacy with someone who tried to drug it out of me," Eleanor replied, stirring her cup without a hint of tremor. That Friday, Alyssa arrived in person. She came alone. No makeup smile. Just a tablet in one hand and a thin smile she tried to pass off as regret. "I brought something," she said. Eleanor motioned to the seat across the table but didn't offer tea. Alyssa set down the tablet, opened a folder. "It's from your last physical, a nurse's observation note, dated, signed, filed." She turned the screen toward Eleanor. Delusional affect, signs of paranoia, mild incoherence. Eleanor leaned in, studied the document. "This is meant to scare me," she said quietly. "No," Alyssa countered. "This is meant to bring you to the table before things go public." Eleanor looked up. "You forged that." Alyssa blinked. "You can't prove that." "I don't have to." Eleanor reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a flash drive. "Your husband used my social to file a tax return for a business he started last year." A beat passed. "What?" Alyssa said, voice flat. "Claimed me as an investor, reported fictitious income to access a larger credit line, used the same signature you copied onto the deed." Alyssa's smile slipped entirely. "And you're just telling me this now?" "No," Eleanor replied. "I'm telling the district attorney next week, but I thought you should know before your name shows up in the discovery logs." Alyssa stood too quickly. The chair scraped sharply against the floor. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Eleanor raised a brow. "I already regret giving you the benefit of the doubt." She didn't flinch as Alyssa slammed the door on her way out. That weekend, Duncan, the investigator, met Eleanor and Melinda at a notary's office downtown. He brought spreadsheets, tax ID trails, login timestamps. and 3 flagged wire transfers from Ryan's consulting firm routed through Eleanor's old accounts. "This is enough to build a case," he said. "The DA's office has already confirmed they'll open a file." Melinda looked over at Eleanor, who was calm, beyond angry now. Beyond vindicated. "I don't want jail," Eleanor said. "I want erosion. I want him to feel the slow panic of things slipping out of his grasp." Duncan nodded. "This will do that." By Tuesday, the filings were in. The fraud report had triggered an audit. Ryan's business bank accounts froze pending investigation. Alyssa posted a tone-deaf, "We're going through a difficult time" photo on social media, standing alone in front of the now empty porch, trying to summon sympathy. The comments were brutal. Eleanor didn't respond, but she read every one. She folded her tablet shut and walked to the mirror. Her reflection was unrecognizable in the best way. Not younger, not harder, just sharper, more deliberate. That night, she sat with Melinda in the assisted living common room, both pretending to watch a rerun of Columbo. "You okay?" Melinda asked. Eleanor nodded. "They asked for inheritance." "And?" She smiled faintly. "They're going to learn it has to be earned." Just as the credits rolled, her phone lit up with a new message from an unknown number. A single photo, her grandson Jack, holding a protest sign outside City Hall. It read, "Respect starts at home. Even when they pretend you're not listening." Eleanor didn't cry. She simply whispered to herself, "He's listening now." And then the phone buzzed again. Unknown sender. "You may want to check the probate court filings. Ryan just tried to freeze your trust." Eleanor's jaw clenched, slowly, with restraint. She opened her drawer, pulled out her folder labeled Countermeasures, and flipped to a tab marked Probate Preemption. If they wanted war over what she built, she was finally ready to show them who'd built it, and how it was going to outlive them all. Eleanor signed the final document at 9:12 a.m. Her signature was clean, deliberate. The notary looked up only to nod, no questions asked. Her assets were no longer hers. They now belonged to a foundation she had quietly created under the name the Whitmore Initiative for Late Life Learning. Its mission: scholarships, grants, and mentorship programs for disabled women over the age of 55. No overhead, no boardroom jargon, just access, tools, and the one thing Eleanor had come to value more than legacy: continuity. Melinda had reviewed the transfer twice, then once more just to be certain. She said nothing afterward, only slid the documents into a sealed envelope and kissed Eleanor's hand like she was sending a queen into exile. By afternoon, Eleanor was back in her apartment, hair pinned back, tablet lit in front of her. Her mentoring sessions were scheduled weekly now, closed-captioned, quiet but electric. She met with 2 students via video call, one learning to navigate a workplace after sudden hearing loss, the other re-entering community college after a 30-year absence. "You don't have to shout to lead," Eleanor typed into the session chat. "You just have to show up where it matters." That evening, her tablet buzzed again. An email from Jack. Subject: "Can I see you? Just to talk." There was no guilt in the text. Just a kind of breathless sincerity that only came from someone still half boy, half man. She replied with one line, "Tomorrow, noon, Stonebridge Park, the bench by the koi pond." The next day she sat there early, wrapped in a navy coat, thermos steaming in her hands. The pond rippled gently under the gray sky, and a pair of ducks glided near the reeds, entirely indifferent to the slow-motion implosion of human families. Jack arrived on foot, hoodie up, hands buried in his jacket pockets. He sat beside her without speaking, staring at the water for a long while. Finally he said, "I didn't know how bad it was." Eleanor didn't respond, just watched the pond. "I heard them say things, Dad and Alyssa. I just didn't want it to be real." Still, she was quiet. He shifted. "I should have said something. To you. I should have helped." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small black case, set it on the bench between them. Jack blinked. "What's that?" Eleanor turned it toward him. A hearing aid case. Inside was the model she had worn for months, the one she never used. Jack opened the lid slowly. "You could hear?" he asked. She nodded once. His eyes brimmed, not with tears, but understanding. Eleanor reached over, tapped the case with one finger, and finally spoke. "Sometimes silence teaches you who matters." It wasn't accusatory, it wasn't even sad. It was just true. Jack swallowed hard. "I want to matter." "You already do," she said, softer now. He didn't say anything after that, and she didn't push him to. They sat together until the ducks drifted away, and the light changed, and the cold reminded them both they were made of something stubborn. When she stood, he stood too. "Can I walk you back?" he asked. She didn't answer, just gestured with her arm. And together, they moved across the path, past the pond, beneath the trees that were just beginning to let go of their last autumn leaves. Somewhere behind them, a group of kids were laughing on a jungle gym. She heard the rhythm of their play, not the exact words, but the joy of it pulsed just the same. That was the thing about sound, Eleanor realized. It wasn't always something you needed to hear to carry. It lived in movement, in closeness, in the weight of a shared silence that no longer felt hollow. And as Jack walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, Eleanor finally allowed herself the smallest of smiles, not triumphant, not vengeful, just quiet, but not silent, never silent again. The days passed in the kind of quiet Eleanor had once feared, but now welcomed like an old friend who didn't knock before entering. Her apartment smelled faintly of orange oil and chamomile. Every morning she rose at 6, brewed a pot of coffee, and opened her window wide, letting in the chilled air and birdsong she couldn't quite hear, but still recognized in the shift of light and leaf. Her books were stacked 3 deep near the reading chair, each one marked with sticky notes and graphite lines. Memoirs, poetry, financial fraud case studies. She lived alone, but not in solitude. Twice a week she mentored. Once a week she met Melinda for breakfast and crossword war. The rest of the time she spent tending her new potted lavender plant and organizing her files, one for the scholarship applications rolling in, and one for the letters. They arrived slowly at first, just a few, mostly printed, some typed in trembling script, then dozens, then hundreds. Some were anonymous, others signed with names and return addresses Eleanor would never use. They came from Florida, from Oregon, from tiny towns she had never visited. One had no message at all, just a pressed forget-me-not taped to the center of the page. She didn't respond to any of them, but she read every single word. She kept them in a lacquered box beneath the window seat. Not for posterity, for privacy. They weren't meant for anyone else's eyes, only hers. Then, without fanfare, the will became public. A paralegal posted the file to the county's online probate records. No press release, no family announcement, but someone noticed. A blogger who tracked unusual estate filings wrote a short post. "Former librarian leaves fortune to adult learning fund. Family gets nothing but silence." It was reshared 3,000 times in 48 hours. A week later, a podcast picked it up. Unwritten, Stories We Don't Say Out Loud. The episode title, signed, sealed, erased. They didn't use Eleanor's full name, but the letter had already done the work of myth-making. People knew. Or thought they did. The podcast opened with her words, spoken by a young actress trying not to sound too reverent. "They tried to manage my decline. I chose to choreograph my exit." A pause. Then the host chimed in. She was expected to vanish. Instead, she became the final editor of her own legacy. Eleanor listened, but only once. She heard it with the volume turned low, captions on, a mug of soup in her hand. It wasn't really her story anymore. It belonged to all the women who saw themselves inside it. And they wrote back. A retired nurse in Topeka, a deaf grandmother in Maine who'd taught herself accounting after being swindled by her daughter, a woman in Arizona who hadn't spoken to her own children in over a decade and suddenly felt less ashamed for it. They didn't want money. They wanted permission, to walk away, to start over, to choose quiet without disappearing. Eleanor never responded. She didn't need to. One Tuesday afternoon, the mail cart rattled outside her door, and she opened it to find a package, hand-addressed, no return label. Inside was a framed photo, an old black and white of 3 women standing outside a factory, wearing headscarves and dirty aprons, laughing like they hadn't earned it but took it anyway. Taped to the back. They called them mouthy. Turns out they were just finally being heard. Eleanor set it on her bookshelf, beside the brooch she'd found in the porch step. She didn't know the women in the photo, but she understood them. That evening she turned off the lights and sat in the hush of the dark. She couldn't hear the wind, but she could feel it in the frame of the building, in the way the walls no longer held echoes from her past, but space for her future. And somewhere across the country, women were opening their windows too. Not for noise, but for air and breath, and the kind of silence that no one would mistake for absence again. He came alone, no legal team, no Alyssa, not even a cell phone in hand. Just Ryan, dressed in the same jacket he used to wear to Sunday school, now tighter at the seams and faded at the elbows. The front desk buzzed Eleanor to ask if she wanted to see him. She paused for a full 10 seconds before answering, yes. In the common room, she sat in her usual corner chair, the one with the soft lamp and the quilt she'd stitched herself back in 1987. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and whatever casserole had been served at lunch. The hallway clock ticked, but otherwise the building was still. Ryan walked in slowly, like he was entering a confessional. Eleanor didn't stand. She folded her hands over her lap and waited. He took the seat across from her, but didn't lean forward. His eyes were tired, not bloodshot, just heavy. The silence between them expanded until it became a presence all its own. "I came to ask if we could try again," he said finally. "Start over." Eleanor didn't react. He cleared his throat. "I know I messed up. I know I got scared about the future, money, control, whatever, but you're my mother." Still, she said nothing. "I thought I was protecting you," he added. "I see now I was just protecting myself." Eleanor reached slowly into her side table drawer and pulled out a small envelope, thick cream paper, sealed in red wax. She set it on the table between them. Ryan stared at it but didn't move. "What is it?" he asked, quieter now. She slid it toward him and finally met his eyes. Then, slowly, she lifted her right hand and signed a single word. Number. He blinked like he hadn't seen it coming, like he truly believed a speech might reverse time. With shaking fingers he opened the envelope. Inside were 2 things. A photograph, creased, color-faded. He was 8 years old, crouched beside Eleanor in the yard, both of them holding popsicles and covered in mud from a sprinkler game gone wrong. Her arm was around his shoulder, and her smile was the kind that wrapped around a whole child. And beneath it, a single-page copy of the disinheritance clause, legally binding, irrevocable, stamped with a state seal. Ryan stared at it. His lip twitched. "I didn't think it was real," he whispered. "You'd really leave me with nothing?" Eleanor didn't answer. Not with words, not with her hands, just silence, the kind that echoed without needing walls. Ryan sat back. His eyes welled, not the kind of tears meant to move someone, but the kind that broke loose when the truth could no longer be pushed back down. He folded the envelope again, sloppily this time, and stood. He didn't slam the chair. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her one last time, like someone searching for a version of his mother that no longer lived in the room, and then he left. Eleanor sat for a long time after, her hands still in her lap, the clock ticking like a metronome behind her. She didn't cry, but her breath caught once, just once, when she looked down at the spot where the envelope had sat. Then came the second visitor, Jack. He arrived with a small paper bag in one hand and a shy smile in the other. "Brought lemon cookies," he said, holding the bag up like an offering. "The ones you used to keep in the tin by the library window." Eleanor smiled gently. He crossed the room and hugged her, not a polite embrace but something tighter, lingering. "I'm sorry," he said into her shoulder. "I know," she whispered back. They sat together, splitting the cookies, letting the crumbs fall without apology. Eleanor looked over at him, this grandson with his open face and uneven heart, and felt something unexpected. Peace, not victory, Not even closure, just the soft stillness of knowing nothing more needed to be said, and that, this time, someone had come to stay. The house looked smaller now. Maybe it was the way the new landscaping softened the front lawn, or how the storm blue shutters had been replaced with crisp white ones. But Eleanor knew the difference wasn't in size, it was in sound. The house had a new frequency now, tuned to voices that hadn't yet found their volume. She stood across the street beneath the shadow of a sugar maple, bundled in her wool coat and a navy scarf pulled tight around her neck. Her cane rested loosely at her side, though she barely leaned on it anymore. Cars lined both sides of the curb. Balloons fluttered near the porch columns. A banner stretched across the front steps in block letters. The Whitmore Center for Empowered Literacy. She didn't see Savannah, but she recognized her touch in the details. The way the front door had been painted a soft gold. The way the porch railing gleamed like it had been scrubbed by someone who understood reverence. Guests milled about the yard, neighbors and volunteers and a few city council members shaking hands. Most were young. A few carried tote bags stamped with the new logo. She spotted Melinda briefly, flanked by two women from the mayor's office, pointing toward the back garden. Eleanor stayed hidden in the shadow. Then Jack stepped forward. He wore a navy sport coat too big at the shoulders, too long in the sleeves, but his stance was grounded. He didn't speak right away, just stood at the base of the porch stairs, looking up at the house like it was a cathedral. Then he took the mic. "Today isn't about a building," he said. "It's about the person who lived in it, the person who taught people how to be louder, even when she herself chose quiet." Eleanor's throat caught. "She gave me her silence," he continued, "so I could learn to speak. She gave all of us a way to hear what matters, even if we didn't know we were listening." The crowd was still, even the breeze held its breath. "She never asked for applause," Jack said, "so we won't give her that. What we'll give her is continuation." He stepped aside, holding out the giant scissors. A young girl with cochlear implants stepped forward to cut the ribbon beside him, and behind them, a new plaque was unveiled beside the door, etched in brushed steel. "In honor of Eleanor, who heard what others didn't." The words landed deeper than Eleanor expected. She stayed across the street, unmoving. She didn't wave, she didn't let herself be seen, but the moment she saw her name, not on a gravestone but carved into the future, something inside her finally unlatched. It wasn't grief, it was release. The tears came without warning. Not heaving sobs, just a warmth that welled behind her eyes and slid gently down her cheeks, like rain after a long drought. She didn't wipe them away, didn't hide. No one was watching, and even if they were, she had stopped apologizing for what showed on her face. This wasn't the kind of victory that demanded parades. It was the quiet win of legacy over inheritance. A house no longer full of schemes and silence, but of ideas, of effort, of sound that mattered. She turned to leave before anyone could recognize her. As she walked away, the faint notes of laughter drifted through the open windows behind her. She couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. She knew what joy felt like in structure, and the house, her house, finally had it. Halfway down the block, she paused beside the community garden where someone had planted lavender. She reached down, pinched a small bud between her fingers, and let the scent rise. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, Eleanor didn't wonder what came next. She simply walked forward, toward it. The light in Eleanor's apartment shifted by degrees, softening the wooden floor into honey and touching the corners of the room like a memory unfolding itself. She sat by the window, the same one she opened each morning to let in the morning chill and the scent of distant pine. A shawl draped over her shoulders. Beside her, a calico cat dozed in the crook of her leg, purring like a metronome set to contentment. The tea on the end table had gone lukewarm. She didn't mind. It wasn't the warmth she craved. It was the ritual. Outside, children passed in groups, backpacks bouncing, shoes squeaking on the newly salted sidewalk. She watched them move like poems in motion, unfinished, uneven, still full of possibility. She turned back to her journal. It lay open across her lap, the pages edged with ink and margin notes. Some sentences were full and winding, others short and clipped, like someone working out how to breathe again one line at a time. The last entry was only half written. Before she could finish it, a knock sounded at her door. Not loud, not hesitant, just human. She opened it to find the building's part-time mail clerk holding out a single item. No package, no envelope. Just a postcard, edges slightly frayed, the kind you found in the corner rack of a roadside gas station. The front bore an image of a cliffside cabin overlooking a deep blue lake. On the back, neat handwriting curved confidently. "You gave me the courage to walk away. No courtroom, no spectacle. Just a quiet step toward something better. I thought you'd like to know. Darlene R., Iowa." There was no return address. Eleanor smiled faintly and held the card for a long time before placing it on the sill beside the cat. Then she returned to her journal. She didn't finish the page. Instead, she closed the book slowly and pressed the cover flat with both hands. Not to seal it, but to bless it. Every page was a record not of loss, but of reclamation. Not of revenge, but of return. Across the room, the tablet blinked. Another scholarship application received. Another late-blooming learner with something to say, asking only for the space to say it. She let it blink. Instead, she reached for her mug and took a slow sip. Then she looked down at the cat and whispered, "Still listening?" The cat blinked at her. That was enough. She leaned back in her chair, the afternoon quiet folding around her in soft, soundless threads. Somewhere, she could imagine Ryan in a lawyer's office, parsing out consequences instead of control. She could picture Alyssa refreshing inboxes that never replied. But she didn't dwell there anymore. That story had already been written, published, shelved. This new chapter was being shaped by strangers, by women with canes and degrees and new email addresses, by grandsons holding microphones and postcards sent with no expectation of reply. Her legacy wasn't a house. It wasn't even the foundation. It was the echo she chose. A voiceover might have said it this way: "Silence was never the end. It was the beginning of everything worth hearing." But Eleanor didn't need voiceovers anymore. She had her own voice, soft and firm, small and echoing in all the right corners now. The sun dipped lower, the cat purred louder, and Eleanor stayed at the window until the world outside turned gold, then dusky, then quiet once more. She wasn't waiting for anything. She was present in everything. When she finally rose to turn off the light, she paused at the mirror. Not to admire, not even to check, but to acknowledge. And as she passed by the open journal one last time, she said aloud, quiet, sure, and unshakable, "They thought I lost everything, but I found the only thing that matters, myself." Then she turned the page and left it blank, on purpose.